Hi, friends. Okay, here we go. I'm Brenda Rigney. I'm a business and leadership coach, and I also host a weekly podcast called Three Uniques, where I get to interview fabulous people and find out what makes them unique in the world. And I also identify as she and her, and I'm grateful to live, work, and play on the unceded coastal Salish territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm pleased to introduce Jessica Robson. Hey, Jess.
Hi, thank you so much
Hi.
for having me.
Great to have you here. So Jess is a communications coach and a cat lover.
I'm sorry, I'm doing animal management today and it's a little extreme.
All good. And she's a communication coach, and she's also an EQI 2.0 facilitator. So we're going to get into that, but I'll even ask Jess to share a little bit more about yourself and introduce yourself.
Totally. So I'm calling in from the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish Nation, which is colonially known as Squamish. We're 45 minutes north of Vancouver, BC, for anyone who's not familiar with Canada's West Coast. I identify as she, her. I'm a white, cisgendered, heterosexual woman with a big big space that we occupy here on these Squamish lands. And you might see my cats, Doug and Roger, and hear our dog Petal farting around today. So apologies in advance for any kind of noise that's in my background. As Brenda mentioned, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said it's all good. As I mentioned, some people may have heard this before, but I've got Sadie, my dog. She's underneath me here, but at any moment she'll wake up and want to be the center of attention. So
always. Yeah. So as Brenda mentioned, I am a communication coach and EQI 2.0 facilitator. And I come by that by way of copywriting. So about 8 years ago, I left the corporate space, and started a creative entrepreneurship, offering copywriting and communication solutions, predominantly for small businesses and entrepreneurs. And over the years, really started landing in the space of more than, writing great marketing campaigns or really fun headlines and taglines. What I started to connect with was supporting people in finding the language that works best for helping them express their value and their values and bring more of themselves out more often. So what that transitioned to in the last year was pursuing a certification in this emotional intelligence model, and then launching a coaching business that's really focused on people getting to know themselves more intimately, finding a way to confidently express that, and then build really stellar relationships, communities, client communities, businesses, and more from that place. So that's me in a nutshell.
It's so great. And I'll add one more thing. Jess is also a guest mentor in my Aligned AF 12-month coaching experience. So we're kicking off Aligned AF at the beginning of July. My cart is open right now. So I'm talking to people that are interested in booking in with me for a 12-month coaching experience. So they get one-to-one coaching with me, but they also get to have time with Jess. So all participants,
there's Doug. Yep.
All participants will get to go through an EQI 2.0 assessment privately, and then get a debrief with Jess, one-to-one. But then she's also going to be doing some group work with us inside that coaching experience. Plus there's another 5 other guest mentors. Some of them you may have come across in some of the other live events that I've been doing over the last few weeks. So the whole point is to work on the inner leader as well as the outer leader in this coaching experience. We're working on business strategy, sales plans, scaling up for growth in our business, but we also need to work on ourselves. And that's so critical right now. So I'm pleased that Jess is going to be a part of Aligned AF. It's going to be super exciting. And then just to remind everybody, today we are talking about the difference between being emotional and being emotional intelligent. So that's my cue up for Jess to start talking about that. What does that mean, Jess?
Great question. So my own personal experience in understanding and then starting to step into coaching and facilitation around EQ was actually from this place of not knowing that distinction or not knowing the difference before. And I will preface a couple things. So there are multiple emotional intelligence models out in the world. We'll just ask everyone to remember to please mute your lines if it isn't currently. There are a lot of different EQ models out there. So the one that I work within and around is called the EQI 2.0. And yet, regardless of what model I was pursuing last year, when I went into the certification, I thought that being emotionally intelligent was literally just being able to feel and express your feelings and emotions. Turns out that's not the case. So when you go through a training with the group that I went through, you actually get your own personal assessment before you go forward and learn how to debrief, facilitate the model, facilitate coaching sessions that are focused in and around this body of work. And so I went in pretty confident, thinking that I was going to tip the scales on EQ and be this poster child for being emotionally intelligent, and wasn't. To my own shock and dismay, not dismay, but just true shock in the moment, I started to learn and understand how my ability to feel my feelings, and I feel really, really big ones. Not only is this tied up in being Pisces, it's a lot of stuff that's tied up in kind of my family system and my upbringing. I also have a capacity for expressing them really strongly. And you could call it a champagne bottle with shaken up with the top still on and the cork popping off. You could call it a volcano. And it's obviously something I'm in process with and around. But saw that my ability to feel and express my feelings sure is a strength. And it can also be my Achilles heel for getting into connection with people. There are times where my ability to simply let an emotion pour forth and feel it so huge can actually be something that cuts off my ability to be connected to someone. So can slow down communication, can slow down feedback, can slow down simple conversation. Can you mute that one, Brenda? Sorry, is that possible? Awesome. All right. So with that, what is the EQI 2.0 model actually, and how do all the different pieces come together?
Okay, what happened?
Sorry, I'll just pause for one moment. Thank you. Okay, so what is the EQI 2.0 and how do all the different pieces come together? So within emotional intelligence, we're not just looking at emotions, full stop. The EQI 2.0 model is actually built around emotional and social skills. So this is why we say that it's a growth-based model. It's heavily context-based, but it is about evolution. And it's really about our ability to understand our emotional selves with a little bit more depth and connection, to be able to take the data from what we feel and make specific decisions around what we say, do, how we act next to best support the outcome that serves ourselves and the group. It's a little bit lengthy. The way I like to really break it down is by saying it's the ability for us to work with our emotions as opposed to get worked by them. Yeah. Sometimes you might hear it articulated as reaction versus response. I'll just unmute myself. Reaction being when our emotions take over, and our response being when we're able to be in relationship with them in the moment to be able to express ourselves in a way that suits the situation best. Now, another little bit of a caveat here. With that, context is key. And so not only context to a situation, but context each of our own lived experiences. So if you are a person who's experienced great trauma, if you're a person from any kind of traditionally and currently marginalized or oppressed communities, we know that even in being emotionally identified, being able to suss out what can best serve the situation, that there are going to be social factors or situational factors that might not actually feel or be historically and currently safe to be able to bring that full expression up and out. So there are different ways to work with and in those situations, depending on the scene and situation you're in, to be able to then still navigate with your emotional intelligence intact, but also your safety intact as well. So these are really big conversations when it comes down to it, and they are nuanced and they're incredibly dynamic. And this distinction between the emotional versus emotional intelligence piece comes down to us understanding this full set of skills that exists inside this model, or that exists for us to be able to tap into at any time. So you might want to grab a piece of paper and a pen. I'm just going to quickly summarize the 5 different themes and the 15 specific skills that exist inside this model. Now, this blew my mind. I had no idea that there were this many different skills that we can lean into at any time that could help us actually grow and expand our EQ. So the model really starts with our self-perception. It's that inside relationship, the one that we have with ourselves. Underneath self-perception, the 3 skills that we work are our self-regard, So that's our connection to and understanding of our strengths and our weaknesses. Our self-actualization, which is ultimately those things that we participate in that are bigger than ourselves. For some people, it's a faith practice. For some people, it's a purposeful community pursuit, or it's a purposeful creative pursuit. And then there's emotional self-awareness. And if I were to put a pin on one skill that's truly the linchpin in being able to grow our emotional intelligence, it's our emotional self-awareness. Because when we're in relationship with what's coming up for us and can understand or learn how to pretty much interact with those emotions without letting them become our identity, so we can experience them without having to live into them in the moment, that's where we're able to expand from and start to get into choice. There's a neurobiology piece here where our limbic brain gets calmed, our prefrontal cortex, our communication center stays online. But that emotional self-awareness piece is truly the big, when we can crack that nut, we can really start cracking open more of our EQ. The second space that we look at is our self-expression. So underneath that, it's our emotional expression. So that's that ability to understand the feelings and emotions that are coming up and express them, again, situationally, in an outcome appropriate way. It's our assertiveness. So assertiveness, not in the sense of aggressiveness, but assertiveness in the sense of being able to stand fully in what we know and deliver and communicate that with clarity and calmness, really, is what it comes down to. And then independence. So independence not only is the autonomy to be able to be self-directed, self-motivated, but then also emotionally independent, so that our experience isn't wrapped up in or fully tied to the emotional experience of someone else. In the interpersonal space, this is our third theme, interpersonal. We look at interpersonal relationships. This is our capacity to build mutually reciprocal relationships with people around us. It's empathy. So often empathy is the number one thing that people equate emotional intelligence to. And it's definitely one of those skills that denotes, from a leadership perspective and on the leadership scale that we use within this model, when empathy is pretty much one of those skills that is not only highly sought after in large leadership roles, but also kind of again, in this body of work, the marker of someone who's going to be successful in leadership. It's that ability to be with someone in whatever experience they're having, hold space for them, if not have the exact same experience, because, 7 billion people on the planet, 7 billion different kinds of experiences. It's the ability to identify something in what someone's going through and find a sense of connection or relatedness to it. And then social responsibility, it's stepping outside of ourselves, being connected to, interested in, and participating with our community, with the people around us, and being able to act in service of those groups. Okay, fourth section. I know I'm going through this very, very quickly. The fourth section is decision making. And in that area, we're looking at our capacity for problem solving. So this isn't just strategy. Oh, Petal's given us some feedback. It's not just our strategy, but it's our ability to solve problems. There's no slow slideshow, Lynn. No, I'm just going through the model really quickly here. Problem solving is our ability to still be in problem solving mode, not fully dependent on or in reaction to our emotions. So it's looking at how our emotions are playing into our ability to be in problem solving. We also look at what's called reality testing. So that's that step of getting, again, outside of ourselves and doing a bit of a check to see if we can really sense what's going on in the environment around us. Third one, impulse control. Now, impulse control is incredibly interesting because if you think about it, there are certain situations where we need to have really low impulse control so we can act quickly. And in other situations, it's really important that we actually can slow down the want to respond to an impulse to be able to be as strategically minded, as community minded, as thoughtful as possible. In the last section, the fifth section, its header is stress management. We look at flexibility, so our ability to step out of the one way, the binariness that we can tend to work in at times. We look at stress tolerance, so the things that we do to manage stress in our lives and how our emotions pretty much impact how much stress we choose to engage with at any time. And then optimism. So optimism on the scale of being, a bit of an Eeyore with a cloud over our heads, all the way up to this idea of toxic optimism, where we can't actually see, feel, or experience the challenges that people might be going through. So inside that model, again, I know I moved through that incredibly fast and thinking about 15 different skills and how do I work all of these all the time. That's also not the point. Two things. We're not looking to just blow out the skills and be ranking super, super high on all of these skills always. We're looking for balance and harmony. So emotional intelligence is truly being able to feel a feeling, understand what's going on for us emotionally, experience it, and then be able to take the data from it, understand it just enough to step back and then say, what does this situation need? What does this situation call on me for, so that I can create the best possible outcome for the group, for myself, keeping, your mental, emotional, physical safety in check, and also acting to be able to take the situation to wherever it needs to go. That's going to keep you in connection with other people, keep you in connection with yourself, support you in still operating and acting from your values. So for someone who ranked really, really high on emotional self-awareness and emotional expression, what often would be the breakdown is my interpersonal relationships. Because when I can express so fully and so quickly, it doesn't leave a lot of space, one, for people to empathize with me, because the way that I feel and how fast I feel it, not so great. But it also doesn't leave a lot of space for people to contribute, to support me in moving through something or something similar. So what I'm in the process of learning, and what I have been, and this, I will say professionally, has a really different experience than my personal life, but to be able to step back from a big feeling in the context of a familial relationship or a conversation with my husband, John, and be able to not take on the feeling that I'm having as an identity, but to start to look and see, okay, what does the situation need? How can I stay in connection with this person in the moment? How can I be as thoughtful about the relationship that we're in? How can I, choose to experience this emotion, but still stay open to lots of different options, as opposed to the one thing that I'm seeing is the path forward here? That's working that flexibility piece. It's working problem solving. So it's taking into mind a few different skills that we can lean into to keep ourselves as open as possible and help us be the leader that we want to be with our teams, the partner that we want to be within our family systems, the community member that we want to be out in the world. So it really turns into this expansive way that we can be more so in choice about how we show up, and less just in the impact of the feelings that are coming from that part of our brain that's programmed to keep us safe, really. That part of our brain that tells us that when love, safety, social belonging are at risk, that we need to fight, we need to flee, we need to freeze, fall, fawn, all those different things that's going on that neurobiological level. So that ultimately is what we're looking at from an EQ perspective. Questions, Brenda? Anything that I've noted that you think I could dive in more deeply to?
Well, one, I think it's a good overview for everyone to understand what are the dimensions of emotional intelligence, right? That it is a complex term. And I think, a lot of times we throw out, oh, we need to be emotionally intelligent leaders, but we don't know exactly all the ways to sort of, all the segments of that, right? All the dimensions and the, and also distortions, like you just mentioned. Like you could also be like really strong in one area, and as a result, that creates a deficit in another area. And just knowing that, right? And as a team or as a team leader, how do you balance out that flow in discussions in collaboration meetings or strategy meetings or problem solving meetings, where it's like, yeah, Jess is going to approach it from this angle, Brenda might approach it from this angle. How do we leverage those two strengths in that meeting, or when we've got 10 people in the room, or a whole organization of like 5,000 employees, which all come at it from a different perspective. So it can be really overwhelming to think, but then also I think it's reassuring to know that there's a way to kind of break it down and understand how to also develop those nuances. So I appreciate you sharing it. There's been a couple points that have been mentioned in here. I think, to note, everyone, this is an overview. This is a general introduction to it. Jess is going to be a guest mentor in my Aligned AF 12-month coaching experience. And part of the experience for all participants is that they'll get a chance to work with Jess one-to-one, go through an EQI assessment, and then a debrief. So Jess, talk to us a little bit about the EQI 2.0 assessment. That's a lot of like numbers and letters and initials. What does it mean? Like all that stuff. First of all, it's just a title of an assessment.
Yep, that's it.
But yeah, like what does that mean? What would someone experience when they go through that assessment?
Yes, 100%. So much like Brenda put into the comments, EQ is our emotional quotient. It is not the same as IQ. And just as a quick note, IQ is actually fixed and typically locks in between 17 and 20. EQ is expansive. It's something that we can continue to learn and we can continue to grow over time. It happens naturally as we kind of shuffle along the age cycle, but it can also be honed in. When we hone in on the different skills, we can grow it intentionally. So when you go through an EQI 2.0 assessment, you get a link to a personalized and like one-time use online assessment. You move through just over 130 questions. And all of those different questions pretty much get shot into the computer and it spits out your current, in the moment, contextual EQ report. And then typically the facilitator that you're working with will do a one-on-one debrief. So they'll send you your report, anywhere from a few hours to 1 hour before when you meet with them. I send mine out just an hour before. And then we go through and we literally just have a conversation. We reflect on the strengths pretty much, or the places of that assessment that you ranked high. We look and see at the places where your number or your ranking is a little on the lower end of the scale. And we just talk. It's a chance for you to see what this specific report and this specific assessment has shown you about where your EQ sits right now. When I say it's contextual, it can be affected by something as simple as getting an email from a boss or a client or a coworker that kind of made you feel a little bit off. Getting that email and then taking this test could skew your results a little bit. It's highly sensitive. So if there's anything going on in your personal life, while the assessment is really focused on the professional space, those can kind of impact where we're at emotionally and then how we respond in any moment. So it's really interesting to get into conversation at times and start to see, okay, what was my environment? What was my emotional experience when I sat down to take this test or this assessment? And then from there, after looking at your results and having a conversation around where that resonates, where you identify, talking even through, the beauty of a high or a low score. High scores, like I said, aren't necessarily always what we're shooting for because they can, take us out in some situations. Being really, really high on impulse control can actually slow me down from making decisions that serve myself in a really great way. I come from a, family system where I had to be really hyper responsible at the age of 15. So for me to be able to not just let responsibility and this feeling of should be the thing that leads me, it's my job often to see where I'm like pumping the brakes on something, but then see, okay, is this actually mine to take responsibility for? How could I be more expansive? Is this an opportunity for me to just have some fun? And can I say yes, right? So we talk through where our high scores support us and maybe where they hold us back. And we talk through where our low scores hold us back, but also can be, impacts of socialization, can be things that have been our coping and our survival mechanisms for, however many years it's been since we've taken a test last or an assessment last. So we talk through all those different nuances and then we can set some goals, whether those goals are specific to growing certain skills and expanding them, whether those goals are specific to parts of your leadership or parts of your business that you want to start honing different skills around. And then from there, we create a bit of an accountability plan and check in again, at least in my practice, within 2 weeks, see how things are going, give you tangible skills, tangible actions to take, tangible practices to apply, and go from there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just to answer some of the questions that are coming, yes, the recording will be sent to everybody after the session. So if you're registered, definitely this will be sent out because we'll have your email and we'll get that to you. So Jess, we'll get into questions and I'll ask people to start thinking about their questions, but not to quite load them up yet. I want us to do our contest just because everyone's here. And I know that in some cases, when we get into Q&A, some people may drop off. Oh, we're not ready for the contest. Okay. So no, we're not ready for the contest. Okay.
Just kidding.
All right. So sorry, we have some assembling on the backside, and my assistant, who's like over here helping me out, is saying, no, we're not quite ready for it yet. Okay. So then maybe what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about Aligned AF and how Jess is going to be supporting again. As I mentioned, Aligned AF is my 12-month coaching experience. So what that's looking like is people are enrolling in July, and we've already got some people set up into our participant pool right now, our cohort. The cart opened last week. It's closing on Wednesday, June 16th. The concept behind Aligned AF is that we are working on, I'm working specifically with business leaders, startup entrepreneurs, up to something big in their life. And what I mean by that is that, you know, as a business leader inside an organization, you've got a strategy that you've got to put together with your team and put that forward into your organization, whether that's at a department level, enterprise level, whatever that looks like. I'm in the business of practicing strategy with my clients. And so I work with business leaders in that capacity to help them get that strategy moving forward. I also work with startup entrepreneurs to help them look at how they scale up their business. They could be a team of one, and they realize now, in order for me to get to that next threshold of revenue, I need to start working with more people. That could be more clients. That could be more people on a team that they need to build. How do they do that? How do they build out their business strategy to scale for growth? And so I work with those two types of clients in that capacity around strategy. So Aligned AF, you work with me for the full business year. We start in July and we go through, depending on when your fiscal year starts, it could start in January, February, but we do some strategy work one-on-one. We work also with guest mentors. So Jess, as I mentioned, is going to be coming in to do the EQI assessment and debrief one-to-one with everyone in the cohort. And as well, we've got a trauma-based therapist who's going to be talking about trauma-informed leadership. We've got a neuroscience wellness coach who's going to be talking about sleep and how to rejuvenate our body and like making sure that, you know, we're taking the time to restore and rest ourselves. Because just as much as we love to do strategy and build out our organizations, it can be tiring. We're putting our full physical, mental self into it, and we need to check in. We've got a relationship anxiety coach, Sarah, out of Sweden, who's going to be working with us. She works with folks that are, again, up to something big, doing big things in their life. We don't want to leave our partners in the dust. We want to make sure our partners, the people that we love and care about, our friends, our family, are with us as we're building out our businesses and our strategies. Who else am I missing? We've got Tracy, who's a holistic inner healer. She's going to be talking to us about breath work, meditation. She also works with crystals and essential oils, and she'll be bringing that into our practice. And then we've got a couple CEO guests that are going to be coming in, people that have been there, done it, that have led strategies, scaled their organizations, that are going to share their experiences with you. So I will send out more information about Aligned AF after the session today, and you can go through it. And if you want to book a call with me to learn more about it, then please do. It would be fun to chat with you about it. And also know too, that Jess coaches people, as she mentioned earlier, one-to-one around their emotional intelligence. And so you can sign up with her and do an assessment, a debrief, and sign up for her coaching experiences. So we'll give you more information about that too. Yes. How are you doing, lovely assistant? We're still not ready. Okay, so let's go into Q&A. We're just gonna wing it and we're gonna go into Q&A, but we'll definitely make sure that we do the draw for the contest. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a few minutes. So for questions that you have for Jess around emotional intelligence, anything that's coming up that you want to dive into a little bit deeper, please load them in the chat and I'll read them aloud to Jess and she'll answer them. So any questions?
Yes.
And thanks, Sean, for mentioning that the EQI 2.0 assessment and framework is valuable.
Yeah. Gotta agree. I definitely, well, I don't necessarily come back to the assessment itself every single day, every week even. Having those skills kind of painted in a more personal picture, because the conversations that we end up having in these debrief sessions are personal, you know, and they can, if the person I'm working with chooses, be vulnerable in that sense of where there's some opportunities. Ooh, self-regulation. I love this. Yeah. It's such these conversations can be so expansive really when it comes down to it. And they are just fully about you. And how often do we sit for 90 minutes and fully just reflect on ourselves inside certain skills, or getting to know ourselves on a little bit more of a deep level that way. And to also see how we can bring our emotional self to work ultimately, because like we're one and the same, you know. And even for people that think like, oh, I'm not that attuned to my emotions or that connected to them, often those people can be some of the most reactive. They don't understand that some of their stress responses are emotionally fueled. And if they had a new relationship with the way that they feel and things that go on under the surface, they could actually show up differently for the people around them and create different environments. So it becomes really exciting in that way.
Absolutely. So Lynn's got another question here. Do you have any strategies for coping with someone who maybe has a lower EQ and
Yes.
find them challenging to communicate with? Like, how do you do that?
Can we start with Hazel's about self-regulation?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. Okay.
No, it's all good. So Hazel, tips on self-regulation. Typically where I like to start when I'm coaching someone who's getting to know themselves on the emotional level is before even what's the feeling I'm having is what's going on in my body. So our bodies can be like our biological barometers. They can be our canaries in the coal mine. So when we get to know what our physiological responses are, so our physical feelings to the emotional experience we're having, often that can be a support mechanism, excuse me, for self-regulating before we even have to get to that place of kind of like choking on a thing that we want to say, holding our tongue, etc. Excuse me, one second.
Water's good too.
Water is great actually for self-regulation.
Yes.
So with that, there are certain things that we can do simply for our biological care, getting enough sleep. And these all do play into self-regulation because they're the things that we can do pre-reaction or response to set ourselves up to have more bandwidth to handle more of our emotional experiences. So when we're well slept, when we're well nourished, fed, we have enough water in our systems, and when we're connected to ourselves, both through the things that we do for ourselves to make ourselves feel whole and complete, and the way that we feel in connection to other people, social relationships, social belonging is super important for our sense of stability. Those are all things that we can do in that preloading section of our care. The emotional and physical awareness, really important too, because when we can start to feel that churning in our stomach or a tight throat and start to identify, okay, I'm feeling really vulnerable, I'm feeling really anxious, I'm feeling big feelings of fear, whatever those things that are coming up in, that's when we actually get to that point where we're working with our neurobiology. There's this idea of naming an emotional experience, naming an emotional experience to tame it. And when we can get more specific about the emotion that we're having, it actually dilutes the emotional response. And in that moment, that's when our prefrontal cortex and our communication centers, so the actual rational part of our brain, can come back online or can stay online for us to be able to see the situation a little more fully, step back from it, and then be able to decide, what do we do now? So in those moments, sometimes a really, really deep belly breath, so breathing really deep in through your nose, expanding into your stomach, and then a nice slow exhale can be a really great way to bring your parasympathetic nervous system back online and to really calm your emotional responses. Give yourself a minute or a pause. Other self-regulation tools that I'll sometimes use are something as simple as like, I will voice it, and in obviously containers that feel really great or safe, I should say, say how you're feeling and just say, I think I might need a minute. I'm noticing that I'm having a bit of a reaction going on and I want to be able to show up the best way possible. Can I have 5 minutes, please? And then, make that commitment to come back. Those are tools that I like to use. So hopefully those are helpful.
I just grabbed my essential oils. This is doTERRA. Sage Wellness is another company that has essential oils. This is peppermint. Peppermint's great for awakening, visioning, making commitments around sort of the future. And so if that's something too, like from a self-regulation standpoint, it's like, oh, I'm feeling like, constricted or not feeling like grounded in myself. It's like choosing a scent that really is enough to shift your thinking, even in that moment, right? And it's just simple as, taking a little dab like this. It could be, rolling it, putting it on some of your pulse points, peppermint, not too close to the eyes, and breathing it in, right? Just like a little inhaler, almost like just I can really feel it going in here. I can feel it like I can just feel it, like, oh, it's activating the sensors in my brain a little bit, but it can make that shift for you. Just get you more present to the moment, to the now.
Yeah. Lavender is really nice too. It's incredibly calming. And if you have space and time, because sometimes when we're in like one-on-one situations, there isn't always time to like take a deep pause, find our peppermint oil, etc. Those are great things. Finding ways to regulate in those moments is one thing. And if you have space, if you're a journaler, write down the thing that you want to say to someone and then rip it up. Write the email you want to send, but then delete it, right? Give yourself a minute to discharge the emotion or the feeling that you're having, putting it down on paper, as ugly as it might feel or sound sometimes. Get it out, let it be expressed. There's this idea of the closer that we can actually come to some of these emotional experiences, the less of a grip they have on us. Mm-hmm. When we turn away from them and run, that's when they get more intense. They kind of chase us down.
And then we end up saying them anyways.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So Jess, let's get maybe on to the next question, because we've got quite a few loading up here, and I want to make sure that we can try and get to some folks. So Lynn's question about when we're working with people that have maybe a lower or EQ, maybe not as aware, not as self-regulated as we just sort of talked about. How do we work with them? How do we communicate with them?
They are challenging to communicate with. I do agree. Some tactics that I can offer up is sometimes, and depending on the nature of the relationship and how, let's just say, new to a relationship with their emotional response they are, it's going to take a little bit of our own self-management to be able to interact with them in a way that keeps us safe and doesn't get them further into their emotional response. Because what their brain's doing ultimately is they're trying to validate, they're trying to feel safe, they're trying to pretty much calm themselves by having bigger emotional reactions more often, or being really self-focused, personalizing through their listening and that kind of thing. So a lot of the time it's in us showing up with our assertiveness in check, with our boundaries in check, to be able to not buy into the way that they react and respond, or react, I should say, because most of the time people who are lower in EQ don't have a really great response mechanism. They're more so just run by their emotional responses. So what that can look like at different times, and again, it's dependent, everything is context, dependent on the relationship, is letting people know what you're available for within communication and what you're not. I had a situation with my sister recently where she was getting incredibly passive aggressive. And I just said to her, like, hey, I'm open to having this conversation with you, but I'm open to having it as adults. And I'm not available for having passive aggressive, emotionally dependent back and forth on one another. So if that's possible, then let's chat. And if not, I'm just going to ask that we step away and let's come back and have this chat when we can actually both be communicators in this situation. And it's not going to just be our 15-year-old selves trying to figure this out. Yeah. Obviously, a sister relationship is different than one we have with a client, a colleague, or a boss. But finding those different ways to understand what you're available for and where you're willing to go with that person, and then apply some of these skills, your assertiveness with your boundaries, your patience and our empathy, without collapsing ourselves into them, can be a really great mechanism. And something that my therapists work with me often on is this idea of when we shift our behaviors, people can't help but start to shift around us. And it's dependent on us standing more firmly in our own EQ, being steady, stable, and then going from there.
Yeah, I love everything that you said. And I always go back to that, like, because as much as I would love everyone to be exactly like me and respond to all of my needs at the same time that I'm feeling them, and, and not to minimize Lynn's question or anyone else that's experiencing that from somebody that is challenging and difficult to work with. And even to the point of, like, could be threatening or a feeling of bullying. Always check with yourself. Always make sure that you're grounded. This is an opportunity for you to work on your emotional intelligence. And can you shift that? And if you need to then request something of that person or somebody else to help you out in that situation, you're at least doing it from a place of grounding, completeness, versus you letting that emotion come into you, question you and your belief system. I always sort of look at it that, like, just check in with yourself and make sure that you're feeling good in what you feel is integrity to, like, how you want to show up as a leader in business, in relationships, and then seek, either take that stand, like you said, set those boundaries, or seek assistance from somebody else, but do it from a place of grounding.
Totally. Yep. And that's that reality testing piece too. Yeah. Is to really be able to see, like, are the behaviors that I'm seeing caught up in my own emotional experience and my story about this person, or are these behaviors that are actually problematic, harmful, etc. Right. So, yeah.
Jeff's got a great question here. You may have already touched on this, but what's your suggestion on where leaders can start with building up their emotional intelligence? What's the first place to start?
I like to offer the very first practice that can be the access point, like I said, to a lot of different skills coming into play, is getting to know your emotional responses first. Mm-hmm. So a practice that you can take on, or it's kind of like, I guess you could call it a weekly challenge if you wanted to, but there is this practice of, for 3 or 5 days, 7 if you want to go for it, a whole month, is to start to track certain experiences that happen in your day, how you felt, so what the emotional experience was, and then any physical feelings that you can start to connect with them. There's this emotions wheel that I'll have Brenda send out that is a really expansive way of starting to expand our emotional vocabulary. Typically, this is a really great place for us to start. I used to think that there were 3 emotions: happy, sad, and tired.
All right.
Tired isn't an emotion, just so we know. But what I needed to start working on, and this was in my early 20s, was starting to expand my emotional vocabulary and my understanding of the ones that I was feeling in any moment. Evidently, there's up to 34,000 different variations of emotions that we can feel, which are too many to remember. But when we can start to get past happy, sad, angry, disappointed, kind of those 7 or 8 core emotions that are easier for people to identify or more colloquially known, and we can get more specific, that's when we can actually start to see that when we can name something, like I said, we can dissipate those emotions more quickly. When we can create that emotional connection to our physiology and our biology and what's going on in our bodies, then we start to see, in a meeting with a colleague, client, or otherwise, when you start to feel that rumble come from the depths of your gut and start to pace its way up into your chest, and we get tight throat, typically where that might be a defensive thing that would come out, you can start feeling that. Take a couple deep breaths, and then be in choice about how you respond in the next moment versus letting your emotional experience run you. But until we really know what are the feelings that I have, how are they triggered, or how are they react, like how do they get activated, what goes on in my body, then we're at the mercy, right, of what's going on under the surface. So I would always suggest that. What's the situation that went down? What emotion did I have? How did it feel in my body? And start to build a relationship with those things so we can understand where we get activated, what it brings up for us, how it feels, so we can start managing ourselves newly in those situations. Brenda, you're muted.
There. Sorry, I'm trying to find the button and navigate. Anyways, I got word from my assistant that we were ready to go with the contest.
Awesome. And then we can get into Trish, Lisa, Meme, Sean. Yeah, we can get into those ones after. Great.
Yeah, and I just want to keep track of time because it's 9:50 and I know some people might be jumping off to go to another meeting. We'll get through it. And even Trish's question about books, resources, etc. We can send some of those out afterwards in the email with the recorded link for today. But I would always suggest Daniel Goleman, father of emotional intelligence. He's written a number of books, resources. There's tons of Harvard business articles on his work as well as his own work specifically, but I know Jess will have some. So we'll get to that question, I think probably more in the email. So here's the contest, just so that everyone's aware of kind of what the prize is and what we're doing. So graciously, Sean Burke, who's already added some comments in the chat, who's the founder of Checking In, which is an app which is amazing. It's an opportunity to check in daily with yourself to see, again, when we're talking about emotions, like my mood, am I happy, am I sad, am I feeling pleasure, am I feeling guilt or shame or access to freedom? it's a great way to daily do check-ins with yourself. And it's a fabulous platform. And then from there, there's other sources of like restoration. Like, so when we're talking about meditation, breath work, they've built this application where you can then, okay, you know, if I'm not feeling great about something, or if I want more joy, if I want more contentment, here are some practices to help mobilize that for you. So one of the things that he's done, which I'm so grateful for, so thank you, Sean, for doing this, is he's given us one free access to the 30-day challenge. So whoever wins the prize today, the door prize today, you and your team will get access to this 30-day challenge on the Checking In app. And we'll send more details out to the winner, and we'll get you connected to Sean, and it'll be logistically set up well. And then everyone that's attending to today, so we'll keep track of everyone that's attended, because we know that people registered, but for everyone that's attending, so thank you for showing up and being here live today and putting in your questions, you'll get access to a 50% off promo code to get the same 30-day challenge. So the price normally is $1,500 for your team, but you'll get it at $750 basically, so 50% off. So that's super cool. So thank you so much for Sean at Checking In for doing that. And so what my lovely assistant, who's AKA my daughter, is doing, so I'm gonna give her full credits to this, and I appreciate her doing this. She's like off school and she's woken up early to be on this call today. She is going to draw the winner. So we've looked at all the people that registered and looked at all the people that are on the call today, and we're putting them through a generator app that she's got. So Miranda. Okay, he can't win because he's on the other way. So Sean, actually you just won, but you're not getting it. That's too funny. Kia Edwards. So Kia Edwards, if you want, you can unmute your mic by the time I try and find you. Just so you know, you've won a 30-day challenge for you and your team. And so we'll make sure that we get you connected to Sean after the call and get you all the information so that you can get set up with that. So congratulations, and thanks for being on the call today. So let's go back to our questions here. So we've got Trisha's question that we'll get back to everybody on, and we'll share those resources. Lisa's question: there's a big focus lately on authentic leadership. I'm curious how that fits with EQ.
Yes, I'm very passionate about this conversation. So in my perspective, and this comes into that self-perception space, it's kind of at that keystone position within the EQ arch, let's say. And when I think about authentic or honest or, you know, just really true leadership, my take on it, and so we all might have a different definition on this, is how we can show up as ourselves inside our leadership roles. When we can show up as like our human self inside all of the different professional hats that we wear and the different roles that we have inside our careers. And so with that, from a self-perception space and even into that self-expression space, really, it's being able to be in touch with our self-regard. So really being able to embrace our strengths and weaknesses, right? Ownership of the places that we operate really, really well. And maybe in similar ownership of some of the places that we have opportunities to grow, maybe some spaces that we actually know just really aren't ours to be able to like hang out in, and how we can bring people up and around us to be able to be supportive and supported. It's that connection with who we are at our core from a values and beliefs perspective. And then in, you know, therapist Melissa's terms, it's how we live in congruence with that, how we actually bring that person up and out, and how we can bring our personality, our identity, our language, our voice, and all those different things into how we lead. In my perspective, business and life are truly one and the same. I personally work to be the same Jess that I am offline with my close friends and family, that I am online within social media, that I am with my clients and the businesses that I support and work with. And creating that consistency as my authenticity has been my goal. And so that's how I really see them connecting, is truly being able to hone in on and understand ourselves, build a relationship with that person, and then understand how we can bring them up and out into our leadership and out into our organizations. Muted.
Sorry, I'm muting. Sorry. I want to make sure people aren't hearing us see all the logistic stuff happen in the background.
All good.
So we've got, I think it's Mem or Mimi King. Can you talk a little bit about highly empathetic and handling that? I'm not too sure what that last word is there. Well, what was it?
Handling it well.
Handling it well. Sorry. Thank you. I often get stuck in trying to fix people. This might be similar to kind of what Lynn was talking about, people that are not necessarily practicing EQ, but I mean, Jess, any other thoughts around that?
I mean, a short thought on it is we know that we actually can't fix people. And that's at the heart of it. Who we can be for the people around us as encouragers, cheerleaders, people who are holding other people to being the human being that they want to be. But when we're high in empathy, often, like I said, we'll see our emotional independence is a little bit lower. And typically what that can do is it can actually compromise our own well-being, giving ourselves enough space to be able to tend to ourselves, care for ourselves, have our own emotional experiences, jump into other people's experiences, thinking that we can make a difference for them if we only, took that next step, did that next thing, checked in once more on them on text message, etc. So it's a balance here. And that's why we talk about certain things like being high in empathy is beautiful. It's a beautiful skill to be able to be with people in all the different emotions that they might have and different experiences they might have. And where does it stop serving you? And if we're running a ton of energy and focus on someone else's experience, are we truly tending to ourselves so that we can be our best person and our best version of ourselves? Right. So that's something even just to consider, is when you notice that you're tipping into fixing, doing a lot for other people, or kind of fully diving into their experience, ask yourself, is this working for me? Yes or no? And then start to see where you can step back and still be a supportive, kind, generous, compassionate person that maybe has a little bit more, gives yourself a little bit more space, and then trusts that that person will either take the steps that they know they need to take or not. And that actually means nothing about you, whether they do it or not.
Absolutely. That's great, Jess. There's a couple other questions in there, and we'll definitely get back to everybody in the email because we are wrapping up the time, and we're really grateful to have everybody on. And I can see some people dropping off because they got to get to their next 10 o'clock meeting. So thank you everyone for being in today's session and asking questions of Jess and I and hearing about emotional intelligence. If this is the first time you've heard about this concept, or again, because we sort of throw it out there as far as company speak or company jargon, we need to be more emotionally intelligent leaders. Dig into this a bit more. I invite you to learn more about it. We'll share resources. You can reach out to Jess. You can reach out to myself. You can learn more about my Aligned AF 12-month coaching experience, where I work specifically with business leaders around these topics, and we dig into it along with strategy. So seeing all the thank yous, the gratitudes, thank you for everyone for joining in today. And we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure.
Amazing. Take care, everyone. Be well.